The morning light filtered through the blood-soaked ruins as Xu Qing contemplated his next move. That figure he'd spotted yesterday still haunted his thoughts. If that's a living person, maybe he's also after that violet light. Or maybe it's a trap. During his days in this cursed city, Xu Qing had learned harsh lessons about survival. The god's aura turned living beings into mutant beasts, creatures of incomparable viciousness and strength. But these monsters mostly slept during daylight hours, unless disturbed. Truth be told, Xu Qing was more wary of living people than the mutant beasts. After all, sometimes people were far more treacherous than animals. Still, his resolve hardened as he gripped the bamboo slip. It didn't matter if there was a living person there, and it didn't matter if it was a trap. He had to go back there. That violet light he'd seen falling 9 days ago during the god's awakening was too valuable to abandon. The bamboo slip had taught him much about cultivation over these past few days. This ancient practice existed long before the broken face of the god appeared in the sky. The system remained largely unchanged: Qi condensation, foundation establishment, gold core, and nascent soul. Whatever lay beyond nascent soul was too advanced for the slip to explain. But cultivation on this world of Armageddon carried a deadly price. The god's aura tainted spirit power. To living beings, that taint was the same as a deadly poison. At some point in the past, people took to calling the god's aura mutagen. Xu, imagine trying to gain power while knowing that very power could kill you. When enough mutagen built up inside a cultivator's body, they would experience mutation. In some cases, they would explode in a cloud of blood. Other times, they would transform into mindless beasts. When the god's eyes opened to look at an area, the mutagen there would instantly become more concentrated, accelerating these horrific transformations. Cultivation was inherently dangerous, but avoiding it wasn't possible. Xu Qing lived on a world where human lifespans were limited and disease ran rampant. Living here was like dwelling in hell itself. Few people died peacefully in their sleep. Without cultivation, you were simply waiting for death to claim you. For countless years, people had developed techniques to manage this curse. The traditional method involved absorbing spirit power while using cultivation techniques to isolate the mutagen in a specific part of the body called the mutation blotch. The amount of mutagen a technique could isolate became the standard for determining its value. Powerful groups and clans hoarded the best techniques like precious treasures. These organizations controlled access to superior methods, maintaining their dominance through this monopoly. Because different techniques isolated mutagen in different ways, the location of mutation blotches could vary between cultivators. Regardless of the method, anyone who practiced cultivation had to deal with mutagen and would gradually develop a mutation blotch. These blotches could never truly be eliminated. Some medicinal pills could dissolve them temporarily, but that only treated the symptom, not the root cause. The bamboo slip mentioned one hope: a massive continent called Revered Ancient, considered the mainland of their world. That was where humans originated, and though it was also infected by the god's aura, they had apparently discovered a way to cleanse themselves of it. However, this method couldn't be widely practiced. Only very important people could access it. For ordinary cultivators, it remained just a dream.
Rogue cultivators like Xu Qing faced the worst odds. They possessed the lowest and weakest techniques of all, making their cultivation practice difficult and putting them at high risk of mutation. Even despite these dangers, cultivators were still common everywhere. Xu Qing had grown up in the slums outside the city, where he learned that one fight gone wrong or one bout of sickness could end everything. Wondering if I might mutate someday in the future is better than wondering if I'll live through tomorrow, he thought, rubbing the wound on his chest as dawn approached. The howling and screaming outside began to fade as daylight strengthened. If this blood rain continued and he couldn't find that violet light, he'd need to leave for a different city to search for medicine. The god's aura and endless blood rainfall had deeply infected everything here, including medicinal plants. The supplies were deficient at best. When the screams completely stopped, Xu Qing confirmed through his cave crack that the sky was bright. Based on past experience, he knew it was safe to emerge, but he didn't rush out immediately. Instead, he stretched his stiff joints and warmed up his body. From his sack, he equipped his weapons, a rusty dagger strapped to his thigh, his black iron skewer in hand, and a carefully wrapped severed snake head tucked away. After taking deep breaths, his eyes hardened into cold focus and he stepped into the open. Moving like a leopard through the empty ruins, he headed toward yesterday's location. High above, a flock of birds flew in formation. Xu Qing licked his lips hungrily, but knew they were too high to reach. Interestingly, birds had largely survived the god's awakening, unlike most other animals. They possessed an instinctive ability to find safe places during the blood rain. Instead of approaching the target area directly, Xu Qing circled around and climbed a hill that overlooked the spot. Lying flat on his stomach with barely opened eyes to avoid detection, he peered down at the scene below. His pupils constricted as he spotted the same person from yesterday. The figure sat next to a crumbled wall, wearing fine clothing, his skin completely normal. Most importantly, everything about him, from his posture to his position, was exactly as Xu Qing had remembered. It was as if he'd spent the whole night without moving an inch. This made no sense whatsoever. If this person was alive, he couldn't possibly have ignored the dangerous creatures that lurked during the night. If he was dead, his uninfected corpse should have been devoured by mutant beasts long ago. Xu Qing lay there quietly, thinking the matter over without moving. Having grown up in the brutal slums, he had learned patience as a survival skill. Time slipped by slowly as he remained in position, observing the situation carefully. Eventually, noontime came and went. Only after waiting for 6 full hours did Xu Qing finally reach for a rock. He threw it in the direction of the mysterious figure, watching as it struck the man with a dull thump. The figure swayed back and forth, then toppled over exactly like a corpse would. As he fell, a wisp of violet light suddenly appeared in the spot where he'd been sitting. The sight caused his eyes to glitter with excitement. For days now, he had been searching for this violet light that he'd seen falling into the city. Self-control lasted only a few seconds before snapping completely. Xu Qing burst into motion, racing down the hill with the speed of a falcon toward whatever was emitting that precious violet light. Reaching the source, he grabbed the object, spun in place, then sprinted out at full speed. The entire theft happened very quickly. Only when he was about 30 meters away did he stop, huffing and puffing, to examine the violet object in his hands. It was a beautiful crystal, sparkling and translucent, more magnificent than anything he'd ever seen. Looking back at the toppled corpse, Xu Qing noticed that without the violet light's protection, the fine clothing was already decaying rapidly. The corpse's skin was turning a sickly greenish-black color. Whatever had preserved it was now gone. Clutching the violet crystal tightly against his chest, Xu Qing turned toward his cave and started running. Halfway there, something felt different. He slowed down, confused by an unexpected sensation. Pulling aside his leather jerkin, he looked at his chest wound. The constant pain had completely disappeared, replaced by only a slight itch. Suspicious, he untied the garment he'd used as a bandage and examined the wound that had been festering just hours before. His expression changed dramatically. Yesterday, the wound had been infected and blackening around the edges from the god's aura, but now it was almost completely healed, with only some light scar tissue remaining. He saw no blood, no pus, no signs of infection at all. Xu Qing stared at the violet crystal in his hand, breathing hard. Somehow, this mysterious artifact had cleansed his wound completely, healing what should have taken weeks to recover from. The implications were staggering. If this crystal could heal such severe corruption from the god's aura, what other powers might it possess? As he stood there in the blood-soaked ruins, holding this miraculous crystal, Xu Qing realized his life had just taken another dramatic turn. The violet light he'd risked everything to obtain was far more valuable than he'd ever imagined.